Thank you, choir. Normally I would preach from the pulpit, but I thought I would give a shot at this standing down in front deal that seems to be all the new thing these days. Today's sermon gets its inspiration from what many regard as the shortest passage in all of Scripture. It's probably, for some of you, the first verse you ever memorized. Sunday school teacher said, we're going to memorize a verse today, and you got scared, and you thought, oh man, that's going to be tough. And then they said, let's memorize John 11:35. Jesus wept. So we'll get back to that, but that is going to be the basis. We're going to talk about weeping, and we're going to talk about relationships, and we'll see if I can get through this without giving you a demonstration of today's topic. What exactly is crying? What is weeping? It's shedding tears as a response to an emotional state generally in human beings. The act of crying is defined as a complex secretomotor phenomenon characterized by the shedding of tears from the lacrimal apparatus without any irritation from the ocular structures. Tears produced during emotional crying, and I found this fascinating, tears produced during emotional crying have a chemical composition which differs from other types of tears, and you may have noticed this. They contain significantly greater quantities of the hormones prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, leukophilin, and especially the elements potassium and manganese. Now you know. Knowledge is power. Okay. I had a very close friend that had an occasion to be producing some of that potassium and manganese. He was at the tail end of a relationship with his spouse, and he had spent some time weeping. And then right around that same time, he lost one of his parents. So on the one hand, he had a relationship that ended poorly and was shorter than he had hoped, and certainly not what he anticipated. And on the other end, he lost his parent with whom he had a very good relationship and a long time relationship, 47 years. And so I met him at the visitation for that service, for that funeral for his parent, and as we were talking, he commented, he said, all relationships end in tears. Now, they're different tears. The tears that he had for the breakup of his relationship and the tears he had from the hurt and loss of his parents were different. But it was his point, I believe, that if you don't have that response, you probably didn't have a relationship. Something that ends in indifference probably isn't as deep as what becomes a true relationship. Relation, it's to be related, to be so connected that it's not going to end without some kind of tear, without some kind of weeping. And that was absolutely true of my first relationship. It was the loss of a very dear friend when I was young. It was a friend that was about the same age as I was. We grew up together. Happened when I was 7, and there were a lot of tears. Angie, if you would put the picture up. That's Freckles. That's me on the right. I don't know what was going on with the hat, and I don't know why the dog was in the house. But that was my first relationship. I was acquainted with Freckles when he was a puppy at about the age of when I was 2. We had just moved into a new town, and I think it was part of a, hey, look, new town, yeah, you're missing all your friends, here's a dog. But I grew to know Freckles very much. Freckles was the dog that could speak English but chose not to. I was utterly convinced of that as a child. And we came back from a vacation when I was 7, and there were clear indications in the yard that Freckles was very ill and probably had been poisoned. And we took him to the vet, and that's what you do, right? And so I wasn't concerned because when you take things to the vet, by golly, they get better. Well, the vet was not in. The vet was out delivering a cow. So he couldn't help my dog. Now, cows have been delivering calves forever without the help of veterinarians. So I don't know why he wasn't at his post, but he was not. And for a long time, I held that against him. I'm starting to get over it. But, I haven't seen this picture It was down at my parents' place. I haven't seen this picture for 20 years, and I haven't known that animal for 40 years, and I can still tell you what it feels like to touch him in that way. Because we had a relationship, a real one. And it ended in tears, and I was actually kind of inconsolable for about 2 weeks. I think it was after that I started to calm down a little bit. And my mother gave me the talk, yeah, look, we miss the dog, but you need to cut this out. But, it speaks to the authenticity of the relationship that it ended that way. And I know that many of you can relate. And why were we related? Well, we knew what each other liked. I knew what he liked. He knew what I liked, hanging around. We enjoyed spending time with each other. We went out of our way to spend time with each other. Now, to contrast with that relationship of two pretty serious friends, short time after that, and I would say within a year, I lost my maternal grandfather. And, I knew my grandfather. In retrospect, I think a lot of what makes me me comes from my grandfather. I can remember incidences where his sense of humor came out. And the kind of things he liked to do, I can relate to that, but I did not know him. We visited maybe once every 6 months, and I would say I enjoyed his company. I liked hanging around on his farm. But he died when I was young, and when we went to that visitation, there he was, and that was interesting to me, and I could see that my grandmother was in distress, but it didn't affect me. I didn't cry. And even though we were related, I don't have a picture of him to put up. So that probably was not a relationship beyond the actual genetic one at that time. Had we gotten to know each other, I'm sure there would have been one. But it always just struck me how broken up I was about Freckles, and yet when my own grandfather died, it just wasn't the same reaction. And that's what it means, I think, to have a relationship. I think that illustrates my friend's notion that true relationships end in tears. Tears are part of the human condition. We all know that. It's part of our life. And so therefore, when we look at the Scriptures, we really should not be surprised. If you look throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, you will find people weeping and crying for a number of reasons. And I think Jesus wept. John 11:35, probably the most famous instance of that, but it's hardly the only one. And as I researched this, there are literally hundreds of examples to use. So I'm only just going to hit just a very few of them. In Genesis chapter 33, verse 4, Jacob and Esau are just about to have a reunion. And Jacob has reason to fear that it's not going to go well. Jacob and Esau, as you remember, Jacob kind of took that birthright, and they're meeting after a separation, and Jacob thinks this is it for him. So he sees Esau coming, and he prostrates himself 7 times and says, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And as he gets closer and closer, he keeps kneeling to him. And 7 times in that culture was a real offering of apology. But instead of the negative reaction he had when Esau saw him, it says in verse 4, Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him and threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So here you have a reunion not unlike the one we saw in the video perhaps, and we have joyful tears. In Genesis 49, verse 33 through 50, verse 1, it says, when Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. So here we have tears of sorrow. In 2 Samuel, King David hears about his son Absalom, and at this time, David's son Absalom is trying to overthrow him. He's in revolt. He's got armies. He's raised people to go up against his father, the king. And there's a critical battle, and during that battle, Absalom is killed. And when he gets this news, this is what we read in 2 Samuel 18:33. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. I mean, that's a father mourning his son, tears of sorrow, even for a son who was in open revolt. So what you're seeing here are relationships. Serious relationships that have either ended or serious relationships that are being renewed. And we have tears. It shouldn't surprise us. So let's take a look at why Jesus weeps. We have that famous passage, Jesus wept. Why was he doing it? Well, as it happens, Jesus' friend Lazarus got very ill. And Lazarus was the brother of Mary and Martha. You might recall Mary and Martha from the story that they called Jesus for a visit, and Mary was concerned about sitting at the feet of Jesus and hearing what he had to say, and Martha was concerned that the house didn't look good. And so Jesus says to Martha, you're going to have your house forever. You're not always going to have me, lighten up. So that's Mary and Martha. They lived in Bethany, and Lazarus is their brother, and they're very concerned because he's ill. So they send word to Jerusalem, where Jesus is, that, hey, you need to get over here. We've seen you heal people. Your friend Lazarus needs healing. And Lazarus, in some of the commentaries I read, has been described as one of Jesus' best friends. So this is a relationship. This is a serious person in Jesus' life. Now, how far away from Jerusalem is Bethany? About 2 miles. So if you want to think about it, if you think about where Bethany Lutheran College is and where South Central Technical College is, from Bethany to North Mankato, that's how far away Jesus was. That's not that far. Okay, 2 miles. And yet Jesus stays in Jerusalem rather than running to heal Lazarus. So as you can imagine, Mary and Martha are distressed, and Jesus tells his disciples that, Lazarus will die. And we kind of pick up the story as Jesus is heading to Bethany, and Mary comes out to see him. And in verse 32 it says, this is John 11, verse 32, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus began to weep. Slightly different translation than Jesus wept, but Jesus began to weep. And this is what the Jews said that were there. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. So those tears are all about Jesus loving someone and being in relationship. That relationship with Lazarus has ended for now. We know how the story ends, but for now it's over and Jesus is weeping. See how he loved him. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? And he could have. But he points out that that's not what he was called to do. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, Take away the stone. Now, this is great. Listen to what Martha has to say. You remember Martha was the one that was all concerned about keeping the house tidy. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Well, Lord, already there is a stench because he's been in there for 4 days. He's been dead for 4 days. So what's Martha concerned about at the tomb? Raising Lazarus? No, there's going to be an odor. This is called a Martha moment. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. So Jesus wept, short verse, but it's in the middle of something really important, and it speaks, I think, rather profoundly to the notion of what it means to be in relationship and how tears are related to that. Another time that Jesus weeps, it's one of the two that generally gets spoken about, is when Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. And we pick that up in verse 41, I believe. Yes, of Luke. Thank you. Luke 19. I didn't have that written down. Luke 19:41. And when he drew near and saw the city, this is Jerusalem, he wept over it saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation." So this is the other time Jesus weeps. Notice how it's different, but still kind of about relationship. Because Jesus knows what's going to happen to Jerusalem. And he loves that city. He loves the people in it. He's going to die for them. And yet he knows that their revolt against Rome is not going to end well. And so he's on that hill overlooking Jerusalem, and he weeps for the city. So Jesus, when his relationships ended, or when they were going to end, he kind of shares in that notion that relationships end in tears. So a question arises. Where are we at with Jesus? When we pass, and we will, what will Jesus' reaction to us be? Is it going to be as a friend? Are we in relationship with Jesus? Or will Jesus lament that we missed an opportunity? And so as I thought about this, we think we know, or we think we're in good relationship, but then so did the Crusaders. The Crusaders went out. They thought they were doing Jesus' work. They went to the Holy Land. They were going to liberate the Holy Land for Christianity. And when they got there, they saw people wearing turbans. And they said, "Well, are these Christians? Are these Jews? Are these Muslims?" And they didn't know, and so they said, "Well, kill them all, because the Lord knows his own." Now, they wore crosses. They had priests. They had Bibles. Did they know Jesus? I would submit they did not. Last Sunday, I believe, or maybe the Sunday before that, during our Lenten experience, we talked about the monks at the Holy Sepulchre. And, the Holy Sepulchre is the spot where we believe Jesus was entombed. It might very well be the spot where Jesus was resurrected. And the monks that are responsible for that come from different denominations. And frequently, they have very specific, responsibilities. Frequently, if one monk sweeps the stair that another monk is responsible for, they'll get in bloody fist fights. Almost life-ending fights. Do they know Jesus? They know about him, but do they know Jesus? I don't want to answer that for them, but it causes me to wonder. And I want to give you an example from my personal life. If you would put the slide up. This is Kerry Livgren. The slide is kind of dark. He's sort of spectrally looking out at us. This is a man by the name of Kerry Livgren who's had a very profound and important impact on my life. I can tell you a lot about him. He's a musician from Topeka, Kansas. I'm from Kansas. His first band was called the Gimlets. He's a musician. Then he formed a band called Saratoga. And then he got together with a guy by the name of Phil Ehart and Dave Hope, and they started another band, which since they were hanging around Kansas, they called Kansas. It's my favorite band. I came to know Kansas back in the 70s, kind of by accident, because I would do my paper out. I had a transistor radio with me as I did that, and I listened to KSUM, Fairmont's country station. And they played, they must have got a promotional record in, and it was from a band called Kansas. Well, that sounds country, let's play it. So they played a song by the name of Carry On, My Wayward Son, and I never looked back. That song has resonated throughout my life. I love it. The swelling chorus, it's what I would call a progressive rock song, maybe a hard rock song. But the chorus, it just swells and it says, surely heaven waits for you. And I was listening to that and I go, oh man, this guy gets it. And I found out it was written by Kerry Livgren. And I've been a Kansas fan ever since. His wife's name is Victoria. I've seen him play live 13 times and counting. Back in the day, we had platters made out of vinyl that contained music. And we would put these on a turntable, it would spin around, and we'd drop what was a needle. It was literally, you might think that needle is metaphor, but it's not. It was an actual needle. And as we played those, what were referred to as record albums, the needle would actually wear away the groove that the music was in. And so some of the albums that I have from that gentleman, I burned through, or I scratched through literally 3 copies. I have like 3 or 4 copies of Point of No Return and Left Overture. Kerry Livgren declined to tour in the 90s because it would interfere with his Sunday school teaching. I always thought that was kind of cool. He's been an evangelical Christian since 1980, and it just keeps getting better. The very first band that they formed, the earliest version of Kansas, recorded a demo record, and that demo record was recorded in a studio in the town of Liberal, Kansas, and I was born in Liberal, Kansas. Did our paths cross? Possibly. But look at this. It's not just that I know a lot about Kerry Livgren. Oh, I absolutely can, because you'd like to see it, perhaps? And I'll put it in the lobby if you guys want to come and look at it later. If you look right there, it says, "For Jeff, Kerry Livgren." He signed that for me. Couldn't be more connected, could we? He suffered a stroke on September 1st in 2009, and I grieved for him, and I prayed for him. A lot of people did, I'm sure. And he's made a pretty remarkable recovery, but his stroke affected the parts of the brain that are specifically involved in the motor skill coordination. He needs to play the guitar and perform music. So odds are not good that even though he's had a good recovery, that he'll ever do that again. And I kind of mourned that loss when I heard about it. But you know, if I were to pass, the simple fact is that Kerry Livgren would not mourn for me, even though he signed a poster for me. So I know about Kerry Livgren, but I don't know him. We're not in a relationship, and if I were to pursue one, it might be stalking. I'd love to go to his church. I mean, I would love to go down to Topeka and hang out in a Sunday school class, but no matter how much I care about him or how much I know, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're not in relationship. And Jesus speaks of this kind of relationship, of people that might have this relationship with him. In Matthew 7, verses 21 through 23, we read this. "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the ones who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' And then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" And that should give us just a little bit of pause, because Jesus is saying there's people that are going to think they know him, but won't be in relationship with him. They'll know a lot about Jesus. They may even invoke his name. Other people may come to know Jesus for real through them, but they won't really know Jesus. So where are you at in your relationship with Jesus Christ? Is your Bible, and if you don't have one, we'll hook you up with one, and I mean that. Is your Bible the equivalent of my poster? Is it something from Jesus? Is it a token? Or is it something you've opened your heart to? Is it just an interesting read from maybe a great teacher? Or is it a letter from a friend that you cherish? How do we get to know people? How do we get to be in relationship with people? Well, we talk to them, right? Carrie and I have never really talked. I've been 20 feet away from him, as close as I've ever been, and I was too awed to say anything. But we don't talk. I listen to what he has to say. But do you talk to Jesus? You can. That's what Easter's all about. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. If that's the case, then he's alive, right? So do you seek out times to pray? And I mean, not out of need. I think going to Jesus in need is tremendously important, but do you also go out of joy at the thought of spending time with your friend, maybe even your hero? Do you spend time doing the things that Jesus did? So now when we leave these doors, we enter the mission field. Fred would have us believe, and I believe that too. So when you leave and you go out into the mission field, do you reveal the kingdom to others? Have you fed the hungry? Have you done the things that Jesus would do? And that doesn't necessarily mean changing anything about your life. Jesus made you the way he needs you. There's a way he'll use you for the kingdom. But have you maybe looked for those things, asked him about it? Have you spent time with Jesus' friends? Good way to get to know somebody, spend time with their friends. Are there people who, may have more time in the faith than you have that you need to seek out and talk to and find out what it's all about? There's opportunities here at Hilltop to deepen that faith and have some fellowship. There's the Alpha Course. We have, the Emmaus weekends. We have Sip and Say. We have sewing groups. We have the choir. We have so many opportunities to get together with fellow believers and have fellowship. And that's an opportunity for you to hang out with Jesus' friends. Are you in a relationship with Jesus that is deep? Do you need to spread that to other people? We talk about make a friend, be a friend, bring your friend to Christ. Maybe that's an opportunity. But what kind of tears will Jesus have for us? Because someday, I believe someday, all of us will meet Jesus face to face. Remember, right at the end of your schedule, it says meet Jesus. Whether you believe in him or not, I believe that's on your schedule. What's that going to be like? Here's what I think it could be like. This is my absolute favorite picture that I've seen so far. It's a little kitschy, but I love the image that this picture gives because Jesus has come down off his throne to meet this person. Shackles are gone. He's got a crown. And I don't necessarily know that it's going to be exactly like this, but I think that it's going to be somewhat like this. Do you see tears there? And I don't know if he's drawn them in or not, but I think I see tears on Jesus' face. I know I see them on the gentleman that's kneeling there. We're going to meet Jesus. And our relationship is going to end, I think, in some kind of tears because all authentic relationships do. When we meet Jesus, is it going to be tears of joy? Will it be indifference? Maybe there won't be any at all. Maybe there'll be tears over a lost opportunity. But it doesn't have to be. Jesus is right here. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. And you can have that relationship. You can deepen the friendship that maybe you've started. And you can introduce somebody so that they can have that experience. Wouldn't that be awesome to think that God would involve us in helping people to have that experience? Because one day we're going to hear from Jesus, and what I would hope that we might hear, and we have hope to hear it, is well done, thou good and faithful servant. Well done, friend. Amen.